And I'll, before I start with the introductions in the class, I'll just make one sort of announcement. Well, two. Jukai ceremony will be, we're hoping to be able to live cast it via Zoom. It'll be on Halloween, Saturday, October 31st at 3 o'clock. So stay tuned for more details about that. I'm hoping people will be able to tune in and witness. The other thing, I haven't run this by the planning committee or Joshin yet, but I'm just to plant the seed. I'm thinking, so we will be having a class the day after the election, right? So, or a meeting, it's a Wednesday, right? And so I was thinking about doing some kind of, one term for is a conversation cafe, kind of a combination of doing sort of almost like a council process, sort of like a check-in process, but kind of a guided discussion about how we're practicing with whatever transpires. I know for me, I would welcome that. That bit of just being able to talk about how we are practicing with whatever unfolds. So anyway, that's just kind of brewing, and can be thinking about whether you'd want to come to that. All righty, now on to class. So please make sure. May the sacred presence of him who said he would abide in his teaching be our guide. May we follow his glorious example and tread with unfaltering step this noble path until we too shall attain enlightenment. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, maha prajna paramita. So welcome to class 7 of our 8-week Precept class series. And this evening, Monica is going to lead us in discussion about the precept on anger, and Camille is going to lead us in discussion in the last of the 10 great precepts on not defaming the 3 treasures. Next week will be our last class, and this will be a kind of wrap-up class and more discussion-based. I'll probably do a little bit of small group breakout, but be thinking about what insights, large and small, you've had from engaging the precepts this time around. Be thinking about what's been most challenging, easiest, what's been most supportive. And one way of thinking about this is thinking about if you were talking to someone doing this class series when we do it again, what kinds of hints would you give them about how to engage this? Could be things about doing the reflection practice or reading the Kyoju Kaiman in the morning. I'm really curious to use that kind of question as a way to check in with each other about what supported us in the practice and what insights came out of that. So anyway, that is what will happen next week. And now I'm going to turn it over to Monica for our discussion of the precept on anger. Thank you, Monica. And before I totally turn it over to you, thank you and Camille both for stepping up this evening to lead this. So happy that you are both doing that. It's been really a great class series for everybody that's contributed. It's been really awesome. So.
Okay, I'm kind of nervous, so just forgive my hyperventilating if I... Okay. Do not indulge anger. Cultivate equanimity. In the realm of the selfless Dharma, not contriving reality of the self is a precept of not indulging anger. Not advancing, not retreating, not real, not empty. There's a brilliant sea of clouds. There's a dignified sea of clouds. So what I'm going to do tonight is break this precept down and discuss all of its parts. So let's look at the first part of the precept. The first part of the precept says, do not indulge anger. The word indulge means to yield to the desire of. So don't give in to the desire of anger. Some translations say, don't be angry, which is also interesting. because, to paraphrase Kyogen Carlson in the Dharma Rain Precept Guide, do not be angry points to a self defined by anger. Being angry or indulging anger is very different from feeling anger, which is important to remember. Anger arises like any emotion, but you get to choose what you do with it. Some people, including myself, might think that this precept is saying not to feel anger. This would be very hard to do and probably impossible, since we are all human and anger is part of the human experience. It is unhealthy to push it down or avoid it if it arises. The next part of this statement, the positive side, if you will, tells us to cultivate equanimity. This is giving us some practical direction on how not to give in to the desire of anger. I love the word cultivate here because the word conjures up vivid imagery for me. I think of the gardening and lovingly taking care of plants and tending towards them. The other noticeable thing about this word is that it is very action-oriented. Cultivating takes work. So in order to not indulge anger, we are to take action. We are to cultivate equanimity. This is a process. It is not something that we will be able to do overnight. It takes time and, most of all, practice. In the realm of the selfless Dharma is the next part. And this is the realm of our Buddha nature. This is the realm of no self. This is the realm that is to inform us when anger arises in us. The next part of the precept says, not contriving reality of the self is the precept of not indulging anger. When you get angry, notice how self-oriented you are feeling. Of course, there's anger that is not self-oriented, but that is different, and I will touch on that in a moment. But usually when I am angry, it's because something was done to me. I've created a separation when the reality is that there's no separation between me and the person or thing or situation I am angry at. Not advancing, not retreating, not real, not empty. I love this phrase, and I've been kind of, I don't want to say obsessed with it, but I've been thinking about it for quite a while now. And I kind of think this phrase holds the key to how to practice the art of cultivating equanimity. So I became kind of obsessed, I guess, with this part of the precept when a friend told me a story. My friend was at the country fair down in, I think it's in Eugene, and she saw a guy who freaked out on another guy. And the guy, he just stood his ground and he didn't move while the anger burned out of the guy that was freaking out. He didn't advance or retreat, and eventually the anger in the other person left. When this story was told to me, that phrase just bubbled up into my head: not advancing, not retreating. Just holding ground. Anger arises and falls, and if you can just hold your ground while it's arising, that is the practice of not advancing, not retreating. And then I have a quote here. How can we meet anger, and what can we learn from it? This question is what this precept is about, and that is from Waking Up to What You Do, a Zen practice for meeting every situation with intelligence and compassion by Diane Eshin Rossetto. And then I have a few quotes about this phrase I'll just read to you. What is not advancing, not retreating? The Tathagata originates in that unmoving place. And that's from The Mind of Clover by Robert Aitken. And then I think another word for this phrase, this not advancing, not retreating, could just simply be patience. And here's a quote from Reb Anderson. Patience is the antidote to anger and the primary condition for enlightenment. Through patience, your vision clears and you see the dependent co-arising of pain, frustration, and anger. Practicing patience does not mean gritting your teeth and ignoring the pain, but developing and expanding your capacity for experiencing pain, opening wide enough to feel the pain without either running away or wallowing in it. When you practice patience, the path to harmful anger is blocked. You can face the pain and relax and breathe with it. And that's from his book, Being Upright. Okay, the next part of this is this precept says, there's a brilliant sea of clouds, there's a dignified sea of clouds. And I honestly don't know what this means. And I didn't get much of a sense of what it means from anything that I read. I looked to the Dharma Rain Precept Guide for answers, and behold, someone asked this very question. Can you explain the last two phrases? And Kyogen's answer was, nope, it's enough to get a sense of them. And I had to laugh at that because that seems like a very Zen answer to that question. But the other evening, I was looking out of the sky around sunset, and I was noticing the clouds move through the sky, and I thought of this phrase, there's a brilliant sea of clouds. And as I thought about it, I asked, when would a person see a sea of clouds? Because, like, what is a sea of clouds? And the answer that came to me was when you're looking at clouds reflected on the ocean. So that's all I have to say about that phrase. I don't know what else it means, but that was the insight I had about that. And so that takes us to the end of the precepts. And do we have time, a little more time, or should I throw out the discussion questions?
You have about 10 minutes,
Oh, wow. Okay.
like
So
including discussion.
Including discussion. Okay, so before I throw out discussion questions, I know I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of acting on anger to benefit all beings, because it's something that I wrestle with. So like the idea of acting on anger that arises from current events or just things that you see in the world, injustice in the world. I think of some of the things that have come out of this type of anger and the type of societal changes that have happened because of this type of thing. And I think about like the Martin Luther King and the protests of the 1960s. And I think of great works of art that have come about because of this type of anger, like the book The Jungle by Sinclair Lewis. It changed lives, that book. So I've always tried to kind of figure out where this type of anger fits into this precept. And I found some quotes that helped me that maybe will help you also. So I'll read those. If we experience or witness injustice in the world and we are intimate with it, we see the light of the precepts. If anger arises in this light, it is no longer personal anger. It is the energy and activity of all beings, and it is appropriate and beneficial. Keeping an eye on the light of the precepts, we will find the way of liberating action for all those concerned, the unjust and the oppressed alike. And that's from the book Being Upright by Reb Anderson. And then another quote is, this precept is often worded, do not indulge in anger, but the point of this precept is not to stuff or deny anger, but to come to understand anger intimately so that we may take more skillful action in its presence, to stop the difference between action that arises out of self-centered anger and action that arises out of life-centered anger, anger that is a genuine response to support life. That's from the book Waking Up to What You Do by Diane Rossetto. And then the last quote is kind of not quite on that topic, but I thought it was really a good quote to end it. And this is by John Dido Laurie from his book, The Heart of Being, which is a really good book. I highly recommend it. And he says, situations don't make you angry. You make you angry. That is the first step. I'm angry because I make myself angry. He didn't make me angry. It didn't make me angry. I made me angry. Now you are full of the power to do something about anger. So with that, I'm going to throw out some questions that I wanted to see what you guys think. First of all, I would really like to hear what anyone else has to say about the brilliant sea of clouds. I'm curious to see what other people think about that. And my other discussion question is can you think of a time or an example in your own life where you did not advance or retreat? So those are my questions. And if you have any other comments or anything about this too, that's great as well. Yeah, are you raising your hand, Sean?
Well, we've talked about a brilliant sea of clouds and a dignified sea of clouds, you and I, for years. I love that phrase, but I
do
don't know
too.
what it means. And I thought recently that the clouds, for my meaning, clouds are like anger, like you're angry. It's a storm coming in, coming from Oklahoma. You know, these big, huge clouds are coming in, and the sun comes in. And I think it's about, to me, it's about perspective. There's the clouds, and they're brilliant and they're dignified. They really are beautiful. Um, but to create that, not completely being taken over by the anger, I'm looking at it, and it keeps some dignity, and it is, they are beautiful in their own way. I don't know if that helps, or I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, it's like
Yeah.
it's about perspective and looking at this bank of clouds that would be anger.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. I kind of feel like, you know, that clouds are, you know, clouds are temporary. I mean, they just float through the sky. So is anger, I guess, you know, or any emotions really. Yes, Dixie.
I actually thought about this earlier in the day and then realized we were talking about it tonight. Clouds don't have a meaning. There isn't a sea of clouds, there's simply a lot of clouds. They aren't brilliant, they aren't dignified. These are words we use to apply to them, to make them into something. They're stories we tell about them. I think anger is maybe the same way, that it's something that it's the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening that make us upset, that make us into these things, not the events themselves. They're brilliant, they're dignified, they're whatever we want them to mean.
Oh, I like that. Yes,
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
I like what you said about advancing and retreating. That was really enlightening.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really like that. Thank you. That really kind of enlightens that a lot for me. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you for that talk. I've been stuck on not constructing reality for the self because I don't know if you saw that. There's a documentary called The Social Dilemma, and it's about social media. And its whole point is how companies are deliberately constructing realities for people on a cultural scale, separate realities, and how angry everybody is at each other. And I thought that's a pretty literal example, right?
There you go. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like that's it. Like
everybody's got this constructed reality. Maybe we haven't constructed them for ourselves, but we've participated. Somebody's constructing them for us and we participate in it.
Yeah.
And we just become angry.
We become angry because we've created, well, I mean, we've created these selves that are being offended, or, you know, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, just, it's like, yeah.
This whole construct of reality. Anyway, I thought.
Yeah, that's fascinating, actually, in the light of this precept, because yeah, these companies are, it's a whole other weird dimension of that, I guess.
I thought so.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow.
And I
Yeah.
loved your example of not advancing or retreating.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I like that story too, the not advancing, not retreating.
Got about,
I can, yeah, okay.
this is like 2 or 3 minutes. I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, okay.
Yeah, no, that's, I got it.
I just want to say that we have in our Judeo-Christian background this idea of righteous anger. And God often becomes angry and allows whoever to smite whoever because of this anger. So I think that sort of dominates our way of thinking, that anger is a tool, if used correctly or righteously, which is incredibly dangerous, but yeah.
I that's true. I think you're right, absolutely right about that. I think because Christianity informs our culture, and I think for us in particular, it's probably really hard to let go of that. And that's probably why I wrestle with the idea of this overarching anger, the anger of, being angry at injustice in the world, which I don't know, like I still, kind of wonder about it. But yeah, I guess the key is to just make sure when you are, from what I'm getting from all of this stuff that I've read, is just to make sure that your actions are coming from no self. I mean, coming from like wisdom, like that Buddha nature.
That seems like a great phrase to end on. So thank you so much, Monica, for leading the discussion. There's so much more on each of these that we could feel like we just scratched the surface. So, but thank you for that, and much appreciated. And I will turn it over to Kemio for the last of the 10 great precepts.
Hi. So I will be talking about the 10th grave precept, which goes like this. Do not defame the three treasures. In the realm of the one, holding no concept of ordinary beings and sages, is the precept of not defaming the three treasures. To do something by ourselves without copying others is to become an example to the world, and the merit of this becomes the source of all wisdom. Criticize nothing, accept everything. Respect the Buddha, unfold the Dharma, nourish the Sangha. So this last one, the first couple of words are a little bit different from the previous 9. It starts with in the realm of the one, which felt a little different from the other adjectives. And lately when I looked at that piece, for me, it points back to one of the other precepts where it says the mind and its object are one. So for when it says the realm of the one, for me, I'm landing in the truth of non-separation and the truth of no self. So in this realm of interdependence and emptiness, we uphold the three treasures by holding no concept that invokes superiority or inferiority, which is, I assume, what is meant by ordinary beings and sages. The superiority and inferiority of people, of beings, of experiences, of conditions. And so when I see Buddha in everything, my habitual pattern of criticizing and judging is transformed into acceptance. Criticize nothing, accept everything. But how do I see Buddha in everything? I get stuck for years on this piece around acceptance, and there's something about acceptance that seems passive. And so that's really what I wrestled with when I was thinking about this precept is Where's the action here? Like, what is the inner action that I take that then shows up in how I relate in the world? How do I see Buddha in everyone and everything, in all circumstances, in all conditions? And importantly, how do I see Buddha not as a bypass, not as a way to just like gild over a moment and get through it, but actually as a pathway to liberation for myself and for others? So when I was kind of focusing in on the logistical, the action aspect of this precept, I kept coming back to the practice of radical hospitality, which I don't know if that's a phrase that you. So radical hospitality is how I'll talk about the 10th precept through that lens. And I first encountered radical hospitality 4 years ago when I was on retreat at a Zen center, and there were some materials like describing the residency, the lay residence, and radical hospitality was the phrase they used to describe how the residents held the retreat container. And it was described like this: to intentionally cultivate, so this is really for the residents, to intentionally cultivate a stance of openness, welcome, and equanimity with all who seek refuge. To provide a space for lay practitioners where they can turn the light inward and then shine the light outward back in their own communities, in their own sanghas. But that, to me, that still sounded like hospitality. Like, what makes this radical? How is this radical hospitality? It also sounds kind of precious and delightful. Like, oh, we're going to provide this safe bubble for people to hang out in. And I thought, well, what about the guest who's a real pain in the ass, very high maintenance, always asking for extra towels or whatever? By the way, that's me half the time. Or what about the other resident who pushes all your buttons? How do you see Buddha in everything then? And kind of, how does this lead me back to honoring the three treasures? And this is where, for me, radical hospitality revealed itself to be a deeply transformative spiritual practice. Radical hospitality, when taken up as an intention, challenges my karmic habits about who or what is welcome. Radical hospitality asks the question, what would be true for me now in this moment if everything about this moment was welcome? I'm thinking more about the phrase and where it came from and how I worked with it or how I've encountered it in Zen contexts. I noticed other contemporary Buddhist teachers also using radical as a modifier for some other word or practice to point us to actually a process of transformation, of the Buddhist process of self-inquiry, of clarifying the mind, that would lead toward an inner transformation that is then shared outwardly. Insight meditation teacher Tara Brach has written and spoken extensively on radical compassion, radical acceptance, and radical loving. And in that, she guides practitioners to hold no concept of distinguishing between what deserves my love, my acceptance, my compassion, and what doesn't. Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams wrote a book a few years ago called Radical Dharma. And in this, it's a little bit different than how Tara Brach is using radical, but same as what I'm talking about in general is using radical as a modifier to point us toward a powerful transformation. And with Kyoto Williams, she talks about radical Dharma as using the Dharma to transform inner and societal karmic habits around race, gender, and power. So the radical modifier tells us that this is hard, messy work that calls forth a warrior stance that often I don't even know I had in me, or with other people who I know well. I didn't know they had it in them either. So I first encountered it in a Zen context, but it in reading up a little bit about it in preparation for this, it sounds like it has deep Christian roots, and maybe there are other faith traditions as well. Of course, the example of Jesus being a fantastic example of someone who demonstrated radical hospitality. There's a Benedictine monastic named Dr. Christine Vaders Painter. She is the abbess of the Abbey of the Arts, which I highly recommend. It's an online sort of mashup between the contemplative arts and the visual creative arts. Anyway, this is what, when she writes about radical hospitality, she could totally be talking about Zen practice. In radical hospitality, we are called to make space for the full range of our experiences of discomfort, strangeness, and loss, and cultivate trust that these draw us into an encounter of radical openness where our walls have been torn down. And this is the part that, for me, gives me guidance around the 10th precept. Like, what does this look like in my daily practice? What does this look like right now? Radical hospitality means trusting that somehow the brokenness we experience when truly welcomed in can become a doorway into a more expansive way of living and imagining the world. Zen teacher Catherine Thanes, who I quoted the last time, writes at the end of her decades-long Zen practice, "Recently, I have come to realize that our work is to love the world just as it is. Because our discriminating mind is constantly thinking of improvements for the world, to love the world as it is means to completely accept those thoughts and our regrets about how the world actually is. Loving the world as it is being willing to be in the only world we know." And that's hard. There's nothing passive about that. I think before, during the social hour, someone talked about the inner and outer layers that we were all sort of sifting through right now. And Jesus, can you imagine anything harder than loving the world as it is right now? And how is that part of our transformation? How is that part of our path? So what happens when we pause in the midst of everything and ask ourselves, can I welcome everything in this moment? And in Zen, we're taught to investigate thoroughly. So in my practice, when I have that pause, can I welcome everything that's true right now? What immediately comes up as a qualifier, well, I can accept my housing insecurity if I know the next situation is going to be better, or, okay, I'm okay with how this is working. There's always some qualifier, but the qualifier is my conditioning. That points me toward my own karmic habits, my own karmic beliefs that are constructed, that are conditioned, that are not real. So accept everything is not passive. It's not a bypass around the stuff that I'm afraid of facing. And then, and only then, when I do that work, can I meet the other big challenge of the 10th grave precept. To do something by ourselves without copying others is to become an example to the world. And the merit of this becomes the source of all wisdom. Somehow I can't do that part unless I'm actively welcoming what is now, inside and outside. Thank you. So I guess my main discussion question, whatever people want to talk about, but also like, what would it be like if everything were welcome right now? Does that resonate for you, this idea of radical hospitality as a way into the 10th grave precept?
For me, it isn't what, but rather who.
What?
I'm trying to answer your question, Cameo, but there's a lot of powerful things that you put forward, and I'm trying to put them in a place in my brain, but it's a very thoughtful question, and I don't have an answer right now, but think about it. It's like, wow, that's scrambling around in my brain. Very thoughtful.
What came to mind for me with the word radical was a personal experience I had, which was being in Chicago for the Democratic Convention in 1968. And there was basically, it became a focal point for a whole unacceptable situation. The world as it was right there in America there was a war going on in Vietnam. So young people were dying in that war. There was we were heading towards a election later on in that year, president, and the incumbent, Lyndon Johnson, had said that he wasn't going to run again, so he'd withdrawn. So the field was thrown open. And Kennedy became a candidate, Bobby Kennedy, and he was assassinated in June. The convention was in August, and Martin Luther King was assassinated in April of that same year. And so the radical political people chose Chicago as the focal point. So 200,000 radicalized youth descended on the city of Chicago. And the mayor of Chicago, who was Daley, was just, he was angry all the time. And he literally stated that he was not going to allow these people to interrupt the city. And so it became a pitched battle between these 200,000 radical students, whatever you want to call them, and the city of Chicago to not allow them to protest. And it was a pitched battle for like 4 days. It was nuts. Anyway, so the word radical, I associate it with very active, aggressive, confrontational behavior. And it's tough for me to associate it with hospitality or anything else because, and I mean, it turned into a literal riot. It was declared that the riot was the police in Chicago, with billy clubs and tear gas and they just confronted. It was crazy. Anyway, so, and the world as it was totally unacceptable to everybody. And it was a calamity.
It's my understanding that in Zen, what we're accepting is reality. Like this is how it is right now.
Right, yeah.
As opposed to, it's okay that a 12-year-old kid with a plastic gun gets shot by police. Like, but that is what, so I think that's my understanding anyway, of what's being accepted. Nancy, did you want to say something?
Well, my comment is much less radical than Ed's. I have a sort of an affirmation that is a very toned down part of this, which is that if love is all there is, then anything else that shows up is here for me to awaken and spiritually evolve. Life really sucks right now in a lot of ways, but apparently it is something that is here for me to notice what buttons are getting pushed, to be able to look at it and say, what is my reaction? There is love underneath this somewhere, and that it's up to me just for myself to accept what I can do, what kind of mindset I can have. How can I spiritually evolve in the midst of all of the pandemic and the fires and the everything else? And one of the things that comes out is absolute gratitude. I mean, as bad as everything is around us, our daily life here in this house is really very, very gentle. So as bad as everything is, I have a lot of gratitude. And that's one of the things that, that I can awaken in myself while this is happening. So that's where I go with it.
Thank you.
Have time for maybe one or two more comments. We got 2 or 3 more minutes.
Cameo, what a lovely talk. Thank you. The concept of radical hospitality, I love that phrase. What it makes me think of is the Rumi poem, you know, this being human is a guest house.
Yeah, almost read that.
Yeah.
Way to close. Yeah.
I love the concept. And I guess you know, this is the hand we're dealt. And so this is what we got to work with. And if we love it enough, then of course we'll want to work to make it better or to change the parts that are ugly. If we didn't care about it, you know, if we didn't love it, we wouldn't care about making it better. At least I wouldn't. So thank you. I'm inspired by your talk to cultivate radical hospitality.
Yeah, I really like that idea of radical hospitality. I've been working on acceptance because everybody is so angry. And, you know, which goes along with Monica's talk. And, you know, and we all, I think, start sort of taking sides and to accept, you know, people as they are and accept the world as it is. And it sounds really passive, but like Teiko talked about, doing something, but you have to accept what it is first, and then you can do something. But you can't just rage about whatever is going on. You know, I mean, so, you know, it's so it's the radical hospitality I see is, you know, accepting, like I would see a hospitality having people coming into your home, having whoever they are, and being hospitable, but not raging at them, but still expressing opinions, and, you know, which I think a lot of us can't do anymore. You know, you try and talk to people who have a different opinion from you, and it gets into a fight, or people just put up a wall. But I don't know what I'm saying. You know, it's just sort of, I love the concept of radical hospitality, and I think it deserves more thought. So thank you.
So it looks like we're almost at time. Cameo, do you have any final thought or anything that you want to add?
To respond to what Penny said, I feel like the 10th precept really closes the circle. So if I'm in a place where I can welcome whatever is here, where I can accept everything, the ground is a little bit better with which to practice the other precepts.
It's a nice note to end on. Thank you so much, Cameo, for the talk, and thanks to everyone for the really rich discussion this evening. It's great. My mind is thinking. Next week we'll have some wrap-up activities. Just be thinking about what you got out of the class series and precept study this time around, and maybe something around that. With that, and continue on with the Kyojukaimon reading in the morning or sometime during the day, and reflection practice in the evening. So with that, I'll say the closing verse. Please make gasho. Abiding in this ephemeral world, like a lotus in muddy water, the mind is pure and goes beyond. Thus we bow to Buddha, all Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, maha prajna paramita. Thanks again, everyone. Feel free to unmute yourself to say goodnight, and have a great week.
Thank you so much.
Good
Thank
night.
you, Kimio. That was